Can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Ron Kerns. I am an autistic award-winning graphic designer. I work, my full-time role is as the designer for Missouri State University, West Plains. And I also have a fairly thriving freelance design firm.
So you were not diagnosed as autistic until you were an adult, right?
I was diagnosed almost like 10 years ago exactly. It was like June 6th, 2014, when I was 54 years old, I think is what it was. And that kind of helped answer so many issues I had with everything, difficulties, challenges, you name it, throughout my entire life. And so the diagnosis just provided a bunch of answers. And that's where I'm at today. Well, as you can probably guess, with the diagnosis, most kids today are diagnosed fairly early, age 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, around that area. And when I was that age, nobody did really, autism was not a household word. I'd never heard of the word until Rain Man came out.
So after all those years, what made you think you might be autistic?
But then I would have never have guessed I was autistic or anything. But then in 2011, the TV show Parenthood on NBC began, and we watched it. We just started watching it from episode 1, thinking that was a nice show. I remember watching the movie that was based on years before, and as I was watching it, I would have my eye on the kid Max in the show who got his diagnosis, and each and every week I'd sit there and watch that kid, thinking, wow, he is so much like I was when I was a kid. And then one day he did something, and I just grabbed my laptop and started Googling, and then my head just exploded with like, oh my gosh. And the one telling thing is, when one of those first Googles I did, appeared a name of a book, and the name of the book is called Pretending to Be Normal. And all I had to do was just look at the name of that book, and I was like, my gosh, that's what I do. And I never really realized I did it until I saw it. And I was like, I always felt that way, but I just could never put my finger on it. Anyway, so then that just prompted me to delve into it, do research on it, and the more and more research that I did, the more and more certain I was autistic. And in 2014, a few years later, I was able to get evaluated. And even when I was going to the psychologist's office, I was walking in the door and thinking, really doubting, like, are they really gonna, is she really gonna give me this diagnosis, or is she just gonna think I'm crazy for even thinking I could be? And then at the very end, when she was going over the report several weeks later, I'll never forget it. She just looks at me with this blank look, and her first thing was, how in the world did you get so far and for so long, and nobody said anything? And that was very validating, and we just went from there.
It's kind of cool that a television show helped you learn so much about yourself.
And if I do happen to see it, sometimes I have mentioned, hey, because of watching Max, that's when I started to suspect that I could be autistic. And there's been a couple of people who have said, yeah, that's what happened to me too. So yeah, it's been great, that the awareness that created, not only, and of course, at the time when it first originally aired, I think I only stuck with it for like 2 seasons, and then that was when you had to sit down at 8 o'clock on a certain night to watch it. There was there was no streaming or anything back then. So and we just kind of lost touch of it. And then just recently, I picked up where I left off and watched the rest of it. And then, then I was able to see Hank do his thing too. And that was very enlightening.
How did your life change after you were diagnosed?
It just opened everything up in many ways. At the time of the diagnosis, I was unemployed, which is incredibly common for autistic people. I had been chronically unemployed off and on my entire career. I mean, you can imagine, here I am, I'm married, I've got kids, I'm 40 something, and having these head-banging, raging meltdowns with no explanation as to why these are occurring. Because I don't know that they're meltdowns. I don't know I'm autistic. I'm just having these head-banging, raging meltdowns. So that caused a lot of stress in married life, among other things. The not picking up on social cues with my wife, and her asking me to do things and me not really quite understanding what she's asking, or I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea. And so as soon as I got the diagnosis, thankfully my wife was on board with it from day one. Even I was, when I first did that first couple Googles watching Parenthood, I was hesitant to show her. I came across one of those pages that had you could be autistic if, and then it gave a decent list of a bunch of traits and behaviors and stuff. I was hesitant to pass that on to her. It's like, what is she gonna think? And then and she looked at it, and so I did eventually give it to her, and she looked at it and all she said was, I think you could be onto something here. And so she was on board with it. So it made a huge improvement. It was much more understanding about how I was and why I was the way I am.
It sounds like your diagnosis helped you both personally and professionally.
I quickly learned about difficulty with employment. And so everything made sense. I'm still, even today, connecting the dots with things that have happened in the past. It was like, yeah, that's why that happened, because of how I am and what I do. There's a book that I read called Journal of Best Practices, and it was about this guy who got his diagnosis, and he pretty much comes out and says that the diagnosis is what saved his marriage, because all of a sudden it gave the explanation to why he was the way he was. And I don't know if that saved our marriage, but sure made it a lot better. And so there are just a couple of examples of just how very important getting the diagnosis was.
Can you tell us about your current role at Missouri State West Plains?
And then this is the job I have here at the university. Is the first job I've had post-diagnosis. I just celebrated my 6th anniversary here earlier this week, and that's the longest I've ever had a job in one place ever. And just being able to, 6 years ago, being able to start a job with my manager, my team knowing I'm autistic, and me knowing I'm autistic, it just made it so much better. And it worked out. It's been working out really good. See, there's the huge difference between before diagnosis and after diagnosis. Before, I had many jobs, most of them very short-lived. Things just never seemed to work out because, in my role as a graphic designer and art director, usually, within like in a marketing department in a company or within an ad agency, there is a lot of those, communication, passing information around verbally, and personality, very personality driven. And so I struggled immensely in those roles because of all that, not knowing I was autistic, and just having to have them without having anything to attribute that to. I was left to think, well, I'm just like everybody else, and I'm not. And so then after diagnosis and getting this job here, I was able to come in right away and having the awareness that I'm autistic. Another thing is just having such a great workplace has also made a huge difference. I've never worked at a place like this to where I'm basically self-managed. Yes, my department manager is right next door. I've got work to do, he's got work to do, and I can come to him anytime, but unless there's something like that, I'm just left alone to do what it is that I do and work with whoever I know I'm doing work for.
And your diagnosis also helped you better understand how you process information, right?
Temple Grandin once explained that, especially when you're autistic, there's 3 different kinds of minds. There's thinking in numbers, thinking in words, and thinking in pictures. And she thinks in pictures, and then all of a sudden, and then her movie about her life came up, which was called Thinking in Pictures. And that's exactly what I do. And so then that kind of makes sense as far as why I do what I do, because I think in pictures. And so that there are complications still. I'm learning those as I go along still, even 10 years later. But at least here in a university setting, I had a pretty good idea that, hey, you know what, boy, I'm going to this place. I would expect that they'd be fairly understanding and patient and all that kind of thing. And it has been.
Do you have any advice for autistic job applicants about whether to share their diagnosis?
There's great hesitancy, like, when do you bring up your autistic with your employer? Do you bring it up at all? And I usually inform people that it depends. But again, knowing that this was a university and I was in my job interview. For this job, I was in the interview, and they asked me about my strengths. They asked me, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And I thought, wow, that's a good headway into explaining that I'm autistic and such. And so they just took it, but you can tell there was some people like, really? Oh, I know I have been, everybody has known since day one.
Can you tell us a bit about MSU's new Autism Center and your involvement? And
so then a few years ago, the chancellor of the university came to my office and explained that he'd been wanting to start a support program for autistic students, mainly because he was aware that autistic students were already here. And could tell that there was a need for a program to provide a little bit extra support and to make them feel more welcome on campus, so for that sense of belonging, and so I was like, well, yeah, I totally understand, because that's something I certainly didn't have when I was in college. And so then I was on an advisory board to help start the program, develop it. And then once the program got up and running, It wasn't too long before we got a donor to kickstart the project to actually build a dedicated building for the program. And so when that came along, I was brought on to work with a team of people here at the university to work with the architects to design the building, to give my input. And so that was fun. And so, I mean, I can look at my window right now, and it's well under construction right now. We should have it open, probably early next year. So some of my art, like I designed a logo for the program, and it's got a pattern that's in the background. The pattern from that background is going to be etched into the glass of this glass and conference room that you see just as you walk into the door. And then there's going to be some other places where I'm going to be providing environmental graphics for within the building.
You've also had a chance to share some of your knowledge and experience with students, right?
Over the past few months, the director of the program has been having me come about once a month to speak to the students in the program about just whatever it is they wanted to know about career, managing being a college student, and life, and whatever else they want. One day was just before Thanksgiving was traveling. I travel a lot, so I know how to do things and how to cope and manage, and so that was helpful. And then so we're at Missouri State University, West Plains. We're a small offshoot campus from the main campus of Missouri State University, which is 2 hours away in Springfield, Missouri. And there on that campus, they have a somewhat similar program called Bear Power. And about a month ago, the director of that program had me come over there and talk to their students. And so that doing that teaching is something that's probably going to be something of a regular thing for this upcoming school year.
And has your diagnosis changed your relationship with your children too?
So my kids are now 23, 25, 26, all within that area. They're all pretty close together. 3 girls. Once again, they grew up with an autistic dad, but no, I didn't know it. So it was challenging.
And sadly, you lost your wife a few years ago.
Though my wife did pass away 3 years ago. So that's kind of been my latest challenge is trying to live independently. She was like kind of my in-house support system. And so finding support and services for an adult autistic person is incredibly challenging, because usually all of the support and services are focused on children. So working through that, and my wife would tell my kids, of course, 3 girls. So, things got kind of loud and high-pitched squeals and all that kind of stuff. And I had a lot of difficulty with that. And, and then she, well, they're just being kids. But I couldn't explain why that was such a challenge for me. Or going to places with them that seemed overwhelmed. The youngest is autistic. She got her diagnosis when she was in 6th grade, and she's doing fairly well. She's living on her own now. They all are.
A big thanks to Ron Kerns for sharing his story. Please subscribe to Inclusive Academia for more great content like this.